This is the ZMAR Podcast. Elite Benefits of America helps small and mid-sized companies with their health insurance programs. And now, your host, Butch ZMAR.
So some people ask what it's like to have 4 kids. And by the way, what does it even matter? It's only 4 kids, right? I know families in the hockey world, and personally, they have 9 or even 10 kids, right? You know, sure, some could say having 4 is a lot, but it's just a perspective, right? And it's not really a whole lot, right? Even 10, right? You talk to those parents, maybe there's only moments where they're like, okay, this is definitely driving me crazy. But outside of that, managing 1 kid or 10 kids, it really doesn't make a difference, especially to those parents. But it's really what we're going to get to is managing those expectations. But most people love to force their own opinion. So even parents at the ice rink, I'll hear, wow, 4 kids. And I'm thinking, like, really? Like, you're going to say something? And then some parents will even go further and said, how do you even pay for that ice bill? And I want to respond, how do you even pay for that family Mexico trip every year, right? You figure it out, right? It's just the way it goes. You have certain things that are a priority for your family, and that's what you end up doing. So although it's not common, but I do occasionally hear, wow, that's amazing. That's great. That's awesome. I wish I had 4 kids. Those are some of the comments I hear. It's not as common, but I do hear those on a regular basis, depending on who the parent is, right? Even more rare, some parents will actually, as soon as they find out I have 4 kids playing hockey, they automatically just say, hey, dude, just let me know what you need to help. I'm happy to chip in. You need rides. You need me to pay for a kid's meal. Like, they were cool. They were willing to just step in. I've actually had families or parents when we're on hockey tournaments that actually picked up my meal with my kid. Like, usually on tournaments, I only have 1 or 2 kids usually. But they picked up the tab, right? Of course, I'm fighting them for the bill, but in the meantime, they were generous enough just to chip in. Not that I would ask for outside support. I'm just saying that some parents are aware of what's going on. But it's all perspective, right? With all 4 playing hockey, it all adds fuel to the chaos at home, right? Just by raising 4 kids, plus we add hockey, there's a lot there. But I would never say that it's easier for somebody that has 1 kid or 2 kids or versus my 4 or somebody at 10. Everybody has their own chaos. They just have to figure out a way to work with it. Some kids are just easier to work with in general. I'm not saying there's bad kids, but in many times the kids are just a reflection of the parenting, good or bad, right? But it's not everybody, because some kids are just outliers altogether. And it builds character later in life too, because I've seen some of them develop at the ice rink where when they're 6 and 7 years old, little Johnny's a pain in the butt for everybody, right? And causing trouble in the locker room. Even in some cases, they're cursing and at a young age. But, as the parents are doing their best, they have a little persona that ends up coming in sports and even in school that actually ends up working out to their favor. And so despite the early on issue. So I'm not blaming parenting. I'm not a parent expert by any means. And obviously the parents, you adapt, you adjust to the situation. And the situation is definitely the boss, right? It's hard to judge others when you're in that situation. But while you're going through that, the big question is that to ask yourself is, how do you approach it in a better way, right? And you always want to look at that. And we'll get to that when it comes to business, dealing with employees and obviously benefits programs. But when we compare it to other things in life, right, like you could be the best at something. And I tell my kids all the time, Patrick Kane being one of the best hockey players that ever played in the NHL, he could always get better, right? Even Connor Bedard coming in, out for half the season and still racked up and was on the goal sheet or the score sheet and goals for the season. You could always get better. You yourself as a parent or your kids could be the best speller for a spelling bee in your class, and they can always get better. There's always room for improvement along the way. And then but having more or less of something isn't really the issue. Go have 10 kids. It's a blessing, right? And I bet along the way, you're going to figure it out. How do you manage 2 kids? And then how do you manage 10 kids, right? The approach, the management style, the patience, you have to adapt. But it's not like earth-shattering science to trying to figure this out. And the same goes in the workplace, and we'll get to that. And the reality is nobody just woke up one day and had 5 kids or 10 kids, right? It was a growing process. And, your management style changes along the way. And then obviously you go from man on defense, so to speak, in where you have 1 kid and you got 2 parents, and then you have 2 kids and there's 2 parents, right? And then you're outnumbered, right? And then you go to what they call zone defense or zone offense. And then as the kids get older, the management style changes, right? So you're trying to teach them life lessons at the same time of personal responsibility, because you can't take care of everything, especially now you have a young adult growing in the house, or soon to be young adult. There has to be some element of change. So then your management style changes once again. And in my case, in about a year, I'm going to have my first driver in the house, and that's going to change a lot, especially with the hockey schedule. So now we have a new set of management skills we have to adapt to, right? We can't keep using the same old ways to manage the household or sports schedules or business or managing employees. We have to adapt along the way. And if we don't, that's where we have struggles. And same with benefits renewals, right? People fight their benefits renewals because they can't adapt, they can't change, they can't look for new opportunities, new resources, and change as they grow. Managing employees and benefits packages are much the same way. And so even if you move companies, right, you could be a manager, or you manage a small team, and you could go from 4 employees to 40 or to 400 employees that you're managing. It happens all the time. It's not unusual to occur, but it doesn't usually happen that way. But even if that's the case, you'll figure out and dive into what would be in your best interest to adapt and change. And again, nothing happens overnight except for sleep. And so market trends change as well. So certain things change, whether it's in business or even healthcare, right? And so there was a time in the past that employers didn't have to offer benefit packages, whether you were a small or mid-sized company, and still compete for employees. It was a different game back then. And then now you cannot get away with without having a benefits plan. And there's a lot of small employers, even medium-sized employers, that are still struggling with this. Sure, there's Affordable Care Act mandates, so some of them are doing the bare minimum, which is not satisfying employees. And so they will constantly have turnover, and they can't retain good talent to make them move to the next level. And then not only all that, but you cannot expect good talent to retain and stay at your company while being cheap on benefits. They're looking for employers that are willing to put more skin in the game. Just to give you an example, we had an employer, client of ours, and this happens across the board. It's not just our client base. Small companies do this. They're small-minded in a lot of cases, or they're focused in different areas. Again, they're not adapting or making changes of expectations. And so most of the employees at this company get it through their spouse. So the enrollment is lower, but for legitimate reasons. So they still meet requirements for the insurance company to maintain a health plan, but they just never had to worry about focusing interest on it because most people opted out because their spouse's plans was usually better. But at the same time, they're only contributing the minimum, which in most cases is 25% of the employee premiums and 0 of the spouse and children, right? Some people listening to this might say, well, that's lousy. But in other cases, people listening to this might say, that's actually fair, right? It just depends on, again, your perspective. And same thing with having 1 kid, 4 kids, 5 kids. It doesn't make a difference, right? It's all that perspective. And if you're willing to change for it. So in this particular case, when it came time to a review and enroll into benefits, the employee was definitely sticker shocked, right? The employer assumed that it was just all going to be okay. And the employee just came from a larger employer, and there were certain expectations that were there because they came from a large employer. In fact, he came from a global employer, and then he's going to a small employer. And I'm not sure what the goals in that situation, why he made that move, but nonetheless, he had certain expectations that weren't met. The employee ended up leaving that company because the high cost of the health insurance being passed on through payroll and what they were getting paid. It just didn't balance enough for him, and so he moved on. But he was definitely hired because he brought a different skill set than they were able to recruit locally for, because he worked for a global company. So the employer did pay more in salary, and that was where the employer felt like they're doing their job to attract and retain that talent. But they were both at losses, right? And so I'm not saying it would have changed the outcomes, but if the employer and the employee managed expectations going into it, it probably would have been different. But again, situation's the boss. I can't voice in this particular case. I just know that they were sticker shock. But when employers that are listening to this, you need to manage those expectations for the employees to avoid issues such as this. So the employer, as time goes on, not only in growth or market share or whatever you want to call it, but just in time, right? And so as time passes, you have to change the management style, not only your employees, but the benefit plans. And so you have to change that expectations. You have to adapt. You have to look for different resources. Different trends are occurring that you need to jump on and make things easier, more adaptable, set expectations for your employees a little bit more reasonable, so that you can retain these employees. You definitely have to look at it a little bit different. You have to look at what's important to you based on your budgets, your values you're trying to bring to the table, and the expectations in the workplace. Like, even going back to the kid stories, I would love to take all 4 of my kids, my wife, and go to Mexico every single year, like some of the families that only have 1 hockey player or no hockey players, and they have more affordable sports, or they're not in, Catholic schools or whatever it might be. It's just not in the cards, right? So we have 4 ice bills, and we have 24 hockey tournaments a year between all of them, and plus all the gear, right? And so maybe one day it'll occur. We've done other things along the way, more economical, and so it's not like we don't do something with the kids, but we just can't do a big trip like that just because we, sat down and figured out what budget and what our expectations and what's within our values, and we felt like certain things were important versus others, and every family is going to be a little bit different. But employers need to adapt, right? And so adapting is hard in business. Many owners, partners, managers, they're all stubborn in their own way. Believe me, we deal with it on a regular basis, obviously internal and obviously external. And so there's a lot of stubbornness in the workplace. So you have to manage those expectations, but you could still be stubborn about it. And so for one example, we had a 100-employee company still trying to manage their benefit plans and HR the way they did when they had 10 employees, right? And so this not only is a Department of Labor issue, but you're not going to be able to control the outcomes of the healthcare plan with the benefit package if you're still managing it the same way you handled it when you had 10 employees. Completely different approaches. You have to change. It's like trying to manage 4 kids, but you still used to 1. Somebody's going to get hurt or trouble for that matter. So you have to adapt to those changes. It's no wonder that a lot of these employers, whether they're, some employers are 1,000 employees or it could be 10 employees, they just dread this renewal process because they haven't adapted. They're still trying to manage the benefits the way they used to. And some small companies, even if they have 25 employees, they're still trying to manage it as if it was their own personal health insurance. In some cases, they don't really care about what the employees' expectations are or what they're paying. It's only what they're paying physically for their family. It's obviously means, it's a dead end road at that point, but the employer is going to have to make some changes. Some go their entire career operating like this, but I think going forward, some of those employers are going to struggle a lot more. So, but you could still be stubborn and flexible at the same time. So another case study we had, this employer was trying to reduce his renewal, right? There was a renewal. He was trying to stay under a certain dollar amount. And so he's fighting for it. This is about 100 employees as well. He didn't care what it took, right? And to a certain degree, to get that premium down, but without jeopardizing coverage. He wanted to make sure that they still had access to the major hospitals. They wanted to make sure that employees aren't going to really have any issues. But at the same time, he's worried about this bottom line. So he literally was stubborn to the point where he kept pushing the envelope later and later and later because we kept going to market, and people didn't want to take the risk. So the new business opportunities weren't there because of the health risks of the group. And I'm not saying it was bad. I'm just saying that we went to a whole bunch of them, and they just either was more expensive or they just didn't want it, so they declined it. So we found a good insurance company that was able to not only give us a number that was favorable, but they allowed us to eliminate network requirements, so they could go anywhere in the country they wanted to go. It didn't matter what. So they can just go to provider, present their card, and away they go, right? There is no network name attached to it. They will pay the claim. We even lowered the out-of-pocket expenses by $1,000 per employee, all while saving $120,000 for the next 12 months. Stubborn? Yes. He was completely stubborn about it, but he was not settling for the renewal increase the way it was. In this case, it worked out. It won't work out like that all the time, and we did have a backup plan that was ready to go because we were pushing that envelope all the way until days before the scheduled open enrollment. And we pulled it off. It was fine. Obviously, we're, from an administrative standpoint, we were hustling to get that paperwork in there. But outside of that, we did have the backup plan that we were just going to renew and then make some modifications to the current plan, just kind of shave off about 1% to 2% just to help out. But it worked out. So you could still be stubborn and flexible because we went to a plan that they never heard of before, but we have. It's a big company, huge, global, in fact. And so this is a division of that company, and the employees can go anywhere they want, and they'll still pay the claim. So the key here is having 1 kid, 5 kids, or even 10 kids. It's all about adapting, growing, and adjusting those expectations. The same is true when you're running a company. You have to adapt as you grow. You need to grow with the resources, the budget, the advisors that you're working with, and the people. And we haven't touched base on that, but sometimes when you grow to a certain point, or you're asking certain questions, or you're trying to expand your knowledge and resources, you might have to change advisors. Adjust your expectations so everyone's on the same page, that you don't have that scenario where the expectations weren't met from the beginning for that employee that had expected the employer to compensate more on the benefit package. That should have been addressed earlier on, and they would still probably been working together because the expectations were set. And maybe they would have never hired him because he would have turned it down, but at least you didn't have to waste a whole lot of time in the waiting period and getting them established. And, that costs a lot of money for an employer to get people up and running. It's just a matter of getting on the same page and adapting and growing. It works better at home when you have kids and chaos and with your marriage, but also managing your employees.